How are you? Good to see you.
Welcome, everybody. This is Patty Egan and I are the co-presidents of the PTSOs here, and we're so excited to welcome. We're going to let you guys introduce yourselves and not take up too much time, but we wanted to thank you for coming and discussing all of the interesting things happening here.
And we think coffee's on its way,
Yeah,
sorry.
help yourself. It's very casual.
Well, welcome everyone. Good to see you all. Thanks for being here. This is in a larger format than our typical meeting, which is usually in the International Cafe. We also have a larger crowd, so clearly there's some important business to talk about. This is a typical meeting for families who haven't been this before, where you can really ask any questions related to the district or the high school, but I also know that there's some specific topics around the budget and other superintendent search that might be more specific questions we have. I wanted just to give a couple of shout outs to our PTSO. Thank you for hosting. This has been a really tremendous partnership with our residents this year. Tonight we have junior night. I was just at Core Power Yoga this morning, and I introduced myself to a junior parent, and he did not know it was junior parent night, so I need to remind people that. And on February 7th, we're going to have a really exciting program for families to talk about the instructional shifts that have happened over the last 8 or 9 years, and the vision of some of the things that we've done specifically in our school, like our multi-level, some more of our multi-level classes, some of the ways in which we're adapting to the schedule, and how that's preparing students for the jobs of the future, and the connection to it. So I really hope that a lot of families will join us. We just did a presentation to our school council on it, and was really well received. So that'll be February 7th at 7 o'clock. So PTSO should have more information about that. And lastly is that we are still campaigning for the Educational Excellence Campaign, which is our for our physics program, which are really, if you had the chance to come in November, it's a really cool set of products. There's one, it's a probe that you can measure temperature, and the data goes straight into a spreadsheet and helps to compute for students. The other are these little carts that you can crash into each other and look at momentum and acceleration and deceleration. And similarly, it creates these charts for students. And if you remember your physics class, you may remember using this, that chart paper and having to draw all that out. That now comes on the Chromebooks, and students actually can do deeper thinking with these products. So we're making some good progress. I think we're at $15,000, and we're hoping to raise some more money for this. And so certainly go to the PTSO website for more information. Happy to answer questions. So I want to welcome our guests, and we'll go down the line. And we want to start, but introduce yourselves.
I'll go. Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Bresky. I'm the school committee member from Ward 2, which is what we're in, of course. This is my first term on the school committee. I have 2 kids in MPS, both at Pierce, a 3rd grader and a 5th grader. And I guess the one thing I just always want to say when we're in these kind of sessions is, depending on the questions that are asked and what we're discussing, I can give you my opinion. I can't necessarily give you the opinion of the school committee. We, under open meeting law, we can't, deliberate outside of an open session. And so, I'll just try to be explicit when I'm saying, this is my opinion versus the committee.
I'm Toby Romer. I'm the assistant superintendent for secondary education, so I work closely with Henry and Newton South and our 4 middle schools. And I'm glad to be here today.
And I'm Kathy Smith. I'm your interim superintendent.
Ruth Ann Fuller, 6th year as mayor and a proud school committee member.
Hi, I'm Kathy Shields. I'm the school committee member and vice chair. This is my 6th year on the school committee, and I've got kids here. I've got a freshman here, a 7th grader at Bigelow, and a 4th
So usually our format is just to start right with questions, and so we will open it up to the floor.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Do you want me to get you going?
Sure.
We can go first.
So I have, so I was watching, I was saying, like, I was watching last night because I couldn't watch the school committee meeting live as it was happening, so I was watching the recording yesterday. And I don't know what we'll do if there is no override, but even with the override, if you could explain, because looking at the gap of $2 to $4 million when we had $1 million last year, and we see impacts on what that did. I just don't know how we are going to function.
You know, that is a good question, so let me start by saying you saw, obviously, if you were able to watch the two budgets that were presented last week at the school committee meeting. I wanna say that it really is early in the process, first of all, so when you looked at if the override were to pass and you saw a $2 to $4 million deficit, you know, I've had some people, and we've been out talking to PTOs all over the district, and it was like, wow, you know, does it matter? And yes, it does matter. So to certainly support the override, and we'll share all kinds of facts about that, when I look at $2 to $4 million, it's very early in the process. And I'm very optimistic and hopeful when you look at some of the things that we're doing. For instance, today I'll be leaving here, I'm working with a group of superintendents called the Tri-County Superintendents. Many of us are looking at a budget driver called the OSD rate. And it has gone up this year. Usually we plan on, every year it's to support our private schools, places where we send some of our neediest students. We absolutely want to support this, all superintendents do in districts. But going up usually 1 to 3% to 14% is about $1.8 million that we hadn't expected in this budget. So today we're meeting, we're actually getting prepared. The mayor is hosting a breakfast for all tri-county superintendents. That's Needham, Wellesley, Brookline, you know, all of the areas that surround us. And we're gonna be talking to our state officials who I believe, and we have some solutions to share with them, will be able to take a look at that type of a driver. The governor's budget is coming out, where the governor is new. She has until, I believe, March 1st. So we are keenly aware of looking at that budget and making our, so I say this to you because when you look at $2 to $4 million, you're probably saying, what kind of budgeting is that? You know, I wouldn't be able to exist if I did that kind of budgeting. So I'm here to tell you, if we are able, you know, as a community, to pass that $4.5 million, infuse that into our operating override, we will be able to stay away from the classroom of the things that you value in this district as much as possible. So you'll see us during the budget process with the school committee. We're actually doing this right now. We're doing this with all our principals. We're doing this with our department heads. We're looking at some things that we might be able to do without at this point to make up that deficit. So I'm gonna end by saying I'm very optimistic. You know, if the override were to pass, I'm optimistic we can deal with that. And truthfully, I talk to the mayor and her team all the time. We do have to look at structural deficits, and we do have to look at ourselves as a district. And you will hear us talk about looking at schools, you know, really taking a look. We have some of our smaller neighborhood schools projected, if you looked at the enrollment presentation, you know, projecting to have, you know, a lot less kids in the next, let's say, 5 years. So we really have to look at what we look like as a district and try to be, you know, as efficient as possible. So there are a number of things when we talk about structural deficit.
I could just amplify, and then I see you want to follow on question, which is just fine. It is normal in January, as we're putting together budgets, to have about a 1% gap at this time of year. The 2 to 4, the allocation for the schools is $271 million. That is normal. It's not easy, it's not pleasant, but it's real. Over on the city side, oddly enough, with 65% of the dollars appropriately going to teaching and learning in the city of Newton. Maureen Lemieux, who is the equivalent of Liam Hurley on our side, we've got a $3 million one that we've got to crunch down. We do have to have a balanced budget and look at the overall rate of growth of revenues in the city, and we can only grow that much. It's a zero-sum game, and we've got lots of really important spiky costs that are affecting all of our budgets. You're seeing it at home, we're seeing it here as managers of your funds.
I can just speak to the micro of this specific school. So I think it's important to look at North in the context of the larger district. So you were right. So I remember you and I chatted last year about the cuts that we had last year, right? And so we cut because the projection was that we were going to go down a few students for this year. And in fact, we're 30 students more than what the projection was. And so we've already absorbed those cuts in this building. Because we have a large 8th grade class, we're projected to go up between 50 or 60 more students next year. And so taking on a deep cut, which would be from the override cut, would be significant. So then you saw in my email that it goes beyond what typically has happened in a cut with this school, that it's really been about class size and not as much about programs. Well, now because we are in this kind of deficit, it's now gone into programs such as athletics, such as theater, such as extracurriculars, and so that's significant. And those are also, I would just say those are things that are hard to bring back as well. And so that's my big concern for this. And what we also know is that while we are, it's really exciting that so many students are coming, more students are coming, right? I think that's a sign of the reputation that the school has. That's really exciting, and we're doing really well. Students, we're just looking at early decisions, and our students are really, really well, which is exciting. We also see this mental health crisis in our school as well. Number of students who are being hospitalized. Our attendance policy helped the students who were, needed a policy to say you need to get into class on time. But we have a lot of students who are missing a lot of school, 15 or more days so far. And that's mental health more than anything. And so how are we supporting those students? Those are the things that I'm worried about. And I think the reason why we're doing so well with the college landscape is because we have amazing college counselors and school counselors. And that goes to the sort of individual nature of how they work with students. And so those are the things I want to protect. And those are the things I'm worried about on the micro level.
Do you want to follow up?
Yes, so, after the budget cuts last year, quite honestly, I was hoping that we're doing overrides to kind of bring back what we lost, not just for further cuts. So, are we bringing back anything that we lost last year? Are we, the classes are larger than they used to be, right? So, are we striving?
This is one of the really difficult, it's a great question, an appropriate question, a tough question. Is what I've done is allocated an additional $9 million to the new public schools. I'm hoping the voters will allocate an additional 4.5 on top of that. Even with all those millions of dollars, it's a steady state program. It's not bringing back things that appropriately people were worried about last year because of the spikiness of costs that NPS is facing. And I think the superintendent can tell you more. But that's the straight answer.
It comes back to that concept of the structural deficit. So the city budget grows at about 3.5% per year. And that's our, 2.5% we're allowed under Prop 2 to increase the tax levy, plus another 100 basis points or so of, new growth in our hotel taxes and, everything else under the sun. The amount the city has been allocating to NPS over the last 5-10 years has been in excess of 3.5%. So the NPS budget is not in a huge way, but crowding out some other parts of the city budget in terms of what's available to fund city services. Within the NPS budget, our personnel expenses are growing over 4% a year. That's the structural deficit we're talking about, and that's the unsustainable part of this. You can't just in perpetuity grow the whole at 3.5% and then grow this very large piece of the pie at 4.2, 4.3%. What that's resulted in, over the 10 years ago, our personnel expenses were 82%, 82.5% of the total NPS budget. Going into this year, they're gonna be close to 89%. So we've taken 6-7% of the NPS budget that used to go to all sorts of operations, transportation and food service and maintenance and, supplies and everything else, and it's now going to personnel expenses. There's a couple reasons for that. Part is the rate of growth in the contract, part is the hiring of new employees, it's, needing to offer the services we offer to special education students. It's all of those things contribute to that 4.3% growth. But that's just, it's not, you can't do that forever. And so that's why we're at the point where we're saying, or Kathy's saying, this is just the hold serve. That, we've been kind of living on borrowed time for a little bit. This is just the hold serve and keep us where we are. And then you've got to build a new base about how do we move forward sustainably. From my perspective, NPS has to grow at 3.5%. Like there's just no other way. You can't continue to do what we're doing. And just to address the, I think your first question was kind of the plan B, and no one from the school committee responded to that. So again, this is my opinion, but there's, we don't have, and Kathy will say this, we're early in the process. We don't have a well-formulated plan B of what do we do. There was, in the presentation, we're gonna look to, find every little efficiency we can. Well, we should be doing that anyway, but again, keep in mind, personnel expenses, our contractual obligations have gone from 82% to 89%. There's not, we can't cut maintenance. We already under budget maintenance. There's nothing left to cut. So we have to find the money from somewhere else. And, from my perspective as a school committee member, I'll be going to the city and saying, we need more money and we've got to find it from somewhere. And whether that's, the last remaining emergency ARPA funds, whether that's reallocating from other city things, whether that's changing our I'm here to advocate for the schools. That's my job. So that's my plan B, but that's not a great plan B.
It's not a great plan B, because I'm an advocate for the schools too. I'm all in on the schools. It's always been my top priority. So we can't run a deficit. So, I will be completely all in on the schools. I'll be transparent about the funds, but I suspect as residents here, you also need, police, fire, library, the fields taken care of, the snow plow. Those are not, gimmicky expenses, but, so I appreciate.
I didn't mean to apply police and fire. Just for the record.
There is no separation between Chris and me and the school committee and me. I am the school committee along with our other 8 members, so trying to divide the wedge and trying to create money that isn't there.
I see all your hands, but can I just add one thing? And Chris, I always enjoy hearing, and I know the time you put into facts and figures. I do want to say to you, that is absolutely correct about the 89% of your personnel. But as a superintendent, selfishly, coming into your district, you pay a competitive wage. We did a presentation probably a month ago. You have a 90% retention rate for the teachers and the staff that come. They stay, they're dedicated to the kids. They do the theater, they do the sports, they teach in the classes, academic excellence. So I don't want that to be missed. I will meet with superintendents today at a meeting, and they will tell me they have positions that they're unable to fill. They're unable to get that calculus teacher there. So I just want to say to you, this is very real, but the support for your students out there getting into these exceptional colleges has been your teaching staff that has longevity, and you offer them a competitive wage. So I just want to put that out there.
Again, just 2 quick micro pieces of that. from a hiring perspective, last year you heard me say that we had people coming from other schools to this school excited because of the mission and the vision of the school, right? And a lot of my colleagues, principals, did not have that experience, and we're fully employed. Additionally, is that we had a cut in our school from typically what's around 100 summer days, professional days for teachers, to 50 last year. So as you know, we have a lot of changes that have occurred over the last several years, and so we've been really struggling to provide that professional development for staff outside of the classroom. So there's certainly the non-personnel related expenses has had an impact as well.
So I heard, this is like a stopgap measure, because of the hole that we're in. We're gonna be here again. If we don't, what's the plan to fix that gap? Because otherwise, we're just gonna keep on throwing money out there.
So part of it is, it's a longer term project. You don't fix a structural deficit in a year. But one of the systemic issues with the MPS budget has been our reliance on carryover funds. So in this year's budget, we carried over about 4.6 million. Our estimates for next year are that we carry over about 2.5 million. So part of our job as a school committee is to manage the budget every year to reduce our reliance on those carryover funds. And so part of that is trimming where we can, is doing things as efficiently as possible. Some of it may end up being an increase in the fees that parents pay for extras. Some of it may be looking at other sources of revenue, like lobbying with our legislature. There are some additional state education funds. The way the state allocation formula works, Newton is not a significant beneficiary of those funds, but it may be that if you do a bunch of these small things over time, you would reduce our reliance on these carry forward funds, and that helps with the structural deficit.
And if I could just build on that, I'll say, Newton voters, 20 years voted for an override, 10 years they voted for an override. It's a pretty lousy economic cycle, so it's a lot to ask at this particular moment. But it is normal, and in fact, I could show you the data. Many cities and towns, particularly those who care so much about education as Newton does, periodically does want to break through that Prop 2.5 cap periodically. So I'll say what Mayor Warren said when he brought forward the 2013 override vote. He said, this should hold us for 5 years. We won't have another override for 5 years. 6 years on, and he was directionally right. I would say the pandemic threw everything out the window.
So what's your plan? So we have an override now, what's your plan when you have another one?
I definitely not for another 5 years, but from year 6 on, it is a possibility. And Warren said it, Fuller says it, same thing. But that does still mean on the city side and on the school side, all of us have to have fair and competitive contracts. We have to be very thoughtful about when we add additional employees. We have to keep rethinking how we teach, how we provide services. It's incumbent upon us to be very thoughtful about those dollars. And I will say proudly that Newton Public Schools, with all sorts of different funding, including ARPA funding through the mayor's office and stuff, we put a lot of money towards our children. And it was good, it was right, and guess what? All those, particularly I'll call out the mental health supports or the technology, the one-to-one devices, we should not be going in reverse. Those were good and right to do, we should continue doing them, and yep, they're expensive. And that, we should be leaning in on that, and I hope as a community we do, even as we deal with the structural deficit.
I think curriculum is done like 11. So it happens in our peer communities a lot more often than it happens here, but it's necessary here too every once in a while. That's the way a municipality can manage its budget given the constraints of Prop 2.5.
And just following up on the mental health issues, are we getting reimbursed by health insurance for those mental health? I mean, you know, health insurance covers mental health. Do we get some
Not,
type of
not
reimbursement?
really how it works in a school setting, but Kathy can tell you more.
Well, we do for certain students, that need particular services. We are able to bill, I think it's Medicaid. Medicare, correct? I've got it right? And, but for others, when you talk about, and I have to share a couple of stories with you. When I talk about Lincoln Elliott, I spent quite a bit of time in that school. I kidded the principal. I saw every inch of every classroom, every room. And what I want to tell you, when you even talk about mental health services, or you talk about the ESSER 1, 2, and 3, the CARES Act, ARPA funds, things that you were actually moving towards that. I'm so impressed that you took a look, having been a former school adjustment counselor many years ago, looking at your counselors, your psychologists, your guidance counselors at your secondary level to work with your students to make sure that they have the best opportunities possible. In looking at, for instance, when I was in Lincoln Elliott, to look at class sizes that I would say were optimal, and I was counting heads in every classroom I went into. So a kindergarten class with about 17, 18 students, you know, had, again, a paraprofessional, a teacher's aide in the classroom. Looking at a social and emotional interventionist, that if a student became dysregulated, they weren't sent to the principal's office to sit there to, no, they could work through, I watched the counselor working with the child, regulating the child, and getting the child back into that classroom so that there wasn't that loss of learning. Looking at the math coach, working with teachers, the reading literacy coaches in those classrooms, being that extra set of hands for students that needed coming out of this challenging time. There are some students that are certainly on grade level, they're making the progress, they're making the growth, they're accelerating. Every student is different. Looking at that personalized learning, and I've said to so many people out there, I've been in education 45 years. We have never seen such a challenging time. And when I look at literature or research, they really talk about, you know, we're gonna talk about this generation for years to come. We're gonna talk about them, but if there's ever a place that is making a difference, and when I say I came from a large urban district in Brockton that had so many struggles, to look at what you're doing for this generation of kids, you cannot back down now. And I just, a couple of things. When the mayor mentions the override, and I know you're proud of that, Mayor, but I will tell you, when I'm out listening to parents or community members, and they're looking at Needham, that every couple of years has an override. They're looking at Wellesley, and there are actually some of you saying, you know, should we be doing it more often? I'm not looking for, but I'm telling you that people understand this. And do me a favor when you leave here, when we're out there, we're talking with about 20 pounds. We were at Brown on Friday, we're going to be at Burr and Ward. You know, to me, this grassroots campaign is probably one of the best things happening. But I need you to go out and to be talking, and we're sharing facts, we're public officials. We're trying to be transparent, we're sharing facts, and I'm not on social media for so many reasons, but, you know,
Me neither.
please, you know, go out and really kind of push back, because I love being in the schools when we're doing this, because you look at those kids out there. I love when I come here, you know, I've looked at I could go on and on about your programs. I was here in your fine arts to see a production of Lost and Found about a week ago. It is amazing what you're doing for these kids, and we need to put the kids first. Please, I hear the political, well, I'm upset with this person. Please, make the kids first. Well, I'm gonna wait to see who the next superintendent is. The next superintendent is probably coming very soon, but March 14th is the day that you have to make a decision, and I'll leave you with this one thought. I know you don't know me, but in Brockton, I advocated greatly at the state level for state funding for equity in education. I wouldn't leave any stone unturned. They received that funding, but I will tell you, I had a $16 million deficit, and it wasn't bad budgeting, it was reliance on a particular fund. And what I'll say, I watched dismantling a system. And they have all kinds of money now, and they're putting supports in place, and they're getting curriculum and appropriate class sizes, and they're gonna be digging out for a lot of years. You are a premier district. You have worked to build. I watched, when I talked about advocating, I always tell this story. You're gonna be sick of me saying it. But I looked at places like Newton, and when I was in with the Senate President and the Speaker of the House, I would talk about your district. I would study your class sizes, your resources, your opportunities for kids. So be very, very careful, and again, we need you to be out there at least having this discussion and to make sure that all parents, and our community can make an informed choice.
I think it's important to be clear what we mean by mental health. So we have a lot of partnerships with outside partners, but a lot of the task is what we do in the building, so employees working with students. So many of you may know Allie Malkin, one of our beloved intervention doctors. She's the one with all the fake drug pills when you walk down on the Just Think Expo. So she's retiring this year, so we'll be hiring a new intervention counselor. And some of the changes that we've seen because of mental health is mental health needs, is that students are moving away, not necessarily moving away, but are moving away from drinking and smoking marijuana to using edibles. That's sort of that is our biggest drug use right now. And we actually just found a wrapper the other day that looked like a fake, it was an Oreo wrapper, but it was actually marijuana, looked like Oreo treats. And so kids are using, and I was talking to a student who was in a situation in possession, and this student was choosing edibles over prescribed medication that a psychologist was recommending, right? So students are using this because it's easily accessible. It temporarily makes them feel better. It's what other people are doing. So that's the danger that our students are putting themselves at risk for. It's working with those students. It's working with students who are challenged with coping from some sort of life change, parent divorce, breaking up with a partner. And those are the things that we're working with on a day-to-day level, and it's skyrocketing. And we have great partnership with outside providers and work with them as well. But when we're talking about employees directly working with kids.
Can I add one thing? I think the other piece to remember is that we talk about this continuum of mental health, social, emotional skills. And so our high schoolers right now, many of them, they experienced middle school during COVID. They didn't have the opportunity to develop those social, emotional skills that are typically developed in middle school. And so for particular our 9th and 10th graders, they're just immature, not like in a bad way, but we need to do a lot of the things that are typically done in middle school in terms of supporting our students, and that's really hard to do in those really large class sizes. And so our teachers are trying to do what our middle school teachers are fabulous at in terms of ingraining those social emotional skills, coping and resilience and ability to have difficult conversations. They just missed because of the pandemic impact on their middle school experience. And so that's a piece of this as well. It's not like mental health thinking like doctors, but thinking about the social emotional skills that are typically developed in middle schoolers, developmentally appropriate to develop in middle schoolers, that we're now trying to figure out how to integrate into our high school experience. And we see that in the large class sizes is hard. Our freshman teachers actually say, like, academically, these kids are awesome. Like, they are right on target academically. They are so immature. I don't know those of you that are parents. I mean, I'm a parent of an 8th grader, but they are very
They can't get their hands
immature.
on each other, and that's the reality.
Yeah.
We're seeing behaviors we've never seen, we hardly ever see with our 9th graders, But they're really smart, they're really talented, athletically, performance-wise, they're great, but they can't keep their hands on each other.
Okay, I'll go. Thanks for hosting this. Dr. Turner, by the way, I sent you an email at the beginning of the year just to reaffirm the fantastic time we had at the back to school, whatever the parents night where we agreed with the teachers. It was really refreshing. So I've been a member, resident in Newton for 20 years total, 15 of the last 15. Education is a huge priority in the family, both for our kids, but also in terms of what we like to give back to. So this is, I think, an important meeting. I think what my comment will be more on the bigger picture basis, and I forget who made the comment of stewards of capital and stewards of the resources that we all pay, and it is a significant amount that goes into the city coffers. So I'll get to the big picture in just 1 second. On the smaller picture, I really encourage that the schools are focused, or the council is focused on getting more money to the school. Because I think if you look over the last 10 years, and this is, maybe it's anecdotal from the people I talk to or the college counselors I talk to, or looking at reports of other regional school systems, it seems to me that educational excellence has to come back, a little bit back to the forefront. When I look and talk to friends in Needham is one, or Belmont, or Winchester, or Weston, or Wellesley, it seems that Newton has fallen back a little bit in the hierarchy of exceptional education. If that's incorrect,
Is
just.
that in a funding sense, or?
No, not a funding sense, just an
Excellence.
overall output. And I've been blessed. My daughter went through Newton North here. I've got 2 others that are coming through. My daughter's doing fantastic. We'll see about my 2 boys, because they're boys.
Mother of 3 boys.
Yes, so it is very important to me to make sure that the excellence component is a driving factor in this. I think, you know, that's why I moved to Newton originally. I grew up in Acton, which was an exceptional school system in the 70s or 80s when I was there. It's still an exceptional school system, and their tax rate's much higher, by the way. So that's on the, I like to hear that, and I hope that the focus can still be on producing exceptional educational outcomes for all of the students here. Now, into the bigger picture basis, so you said stewards of the resources and capital here, and one of the reasons I think we're in the situation we're in, and I focus on the financials, and I've gone through budgets in the past, is there has been a lack of prioritization within the city on what is a must be done versus what we'd like to do in the near term versus is this really something that needs to be done in the relatively near future, let's say 5 to 10 years. Something families have to do all the time, which is what do we have to spend our money on now versus what can we delay. As a budgeter, you have to do that all the time. What I noticed in the budget, and these are 2 massive things in my opinion, which haven't been addressed in terms of how the city's gonna handle it, is number 1, the healthcare for the city budget went from $47 million to $75 million in the last 10 years. So we all have higher healthcare expenses, but I haven't heard anything on how self-funding is a better idea than some other form of that, because $75 million for 1 year on municipal health insurance is huge. The other is that our contributions for the pension and healthcare workers for municipal employees has gone from 25 to 52 million. I'm using round numbers in the last 2 years. Between those 2 things, you just do, you know, some simple math, and you're really talking in excess of $50 million a year that the city, for whatever reason, we didn't fund that when it should have been funded, and now we have to make up for that. And so, I wasn't here when those decisions were made at the time, but I am here now.
Yeah.
And by the way, maybe I'm coming off as negative. I'm actually trying to have an understanding, because if I'm going to support something that's gonna cost the family a decent amount of money, I wanna make sure that the prioritization comes into play. So, that's in the very big picture, and I just went through the budget here for the override, and of the $15 million that's supposed to be raised, $4.5 million is going to students.
You gotta add in countryside,
Okay.
but 75% of the dollars, plus Horace Mann.
Okay.
75% of the dollars are for our students.
Yeah, I meant of current students, the whole, not the capital or stuff like that.
I'm sorry, dollars are dollars.
Okay.
75% of the override dollars, if our voters vote yes, are
Okay.
for students teaching and learning, which to me feels proper and right.
Sure. So I would just like to make sure that the budgeting committee is representative of the populace, because while we're all here for students, you know, $1 million per year for parks, actually parks and some athletic fields is, you know, one thing. There's $1 million for climate change and
Half, 500.
nurturing of, climate change and the nurturing of trees, which already has an $800,000 budget line item in there. So I'm not saying that those things aren't important. I'm saying it seems like there's never been a project that the city really isn't saying no to. And meanwhile, I drive on the.
Welcome to my life,
Well-
and how often I'm saying no.
Okay, well, as an example.
You're welcome to come visit with me for a day and see.
Sure, well, as an example, we don't know about that, and I will say that the
Yeah.
roads
Right.
need the $1 million a year more, a lot more than the trees do, especially when we spend 17 million.
Can I start with the educational excellence?
Yeah,
Excuse me, hold on, let me just,
absolutely.
the last comment I want to make is,
Right.
when we spent $17 million on Webster Woods. Okay, so I don't see where educational excellence is great, I think it should be at the forefront, but somehow, as a resident, I'm feeling that there's a lot of other things that are getting pushed into this. It's like a massive omnibus bill, where we're losing sight of what must be done as opposed to what we'd like to do.
I just want to respond to the first comments about excellence and are we losing excellence here in the district. And that, I've heard that at school committee meetings, and it seems to me that there's no facts that are behind it, so I wanted to share some facts. This past class of 2022, we've had more students accepted to Ivy League schools than we've had in a very, very long time, since we've recorded that data. This year's class, early decision, we're accelerating that pace from last year. When we categorize student, and what's interesting about that data is that I asked, because I know that there's been some criticism of the district, not just the high schools. And so I asked our data specialist, how many of those students who have been accepted to Ivy League schools started in kindergarten and have gone through NPS? 68% started in kindergarten. That to me is amazing, considering how many students transition in and out and then come back during high school. All of them, 68% starting in kindergarten, go all the way through. One of the, I think, really interesting data points that the state gives us for MCAS is student growth percentage, which measures how students did in their sophomore MCAS versus how they did in their 8th grade. And so our current juniors, what they took, the MCAS they took last year, I can't find a school that actually did better than us in our student growth percentage. We look at Wellesley, Needham, like we're beating them by 20% in terms of how our students are doing. And I think it's a great percentage because it actually shows the impact of student growth over that time, and school is a huge part of that, right, in terms of how students are growing. And so I really find it, disappointing that discussion is going on, because it's not layered in any information or fact at all, and I worry that parents who are happy with the schools and are not paying attention are hearing this noise, but there's actually no fact that's being layered into, because actually our students are doing far better. What is true is that our students who are struggling more than they ever had. And so we're seeing, we've seen since the pandemic a decline in our students going to college, right? So that's an interesting question of what is the future preparation of our students? So there's things for us to work on, right? There's things for us to grow and improve, and certainly we're a school in change, and I think great organizations are always looking to improve, and that's what our focus is. There's also a shift in terms of what students need in order to grow. And so 5-10 years ago, when I would go into an English class, the students were assigned 5 essays every quarter. Students weren't thinking about how to revise those essays. They were just trying to figure out how to get them done. And we're focusing right now more on the depth, how to learn about the writing process, which is so much more important when you have ChatGPT, when students can just input and produce, right? We want them to learn how to write, how to think deeply, how to be close readers, because we know that no one is reading anymore, right? Adults aren't reading right now, right? How do we help students to read closely and deeply? Like, those are the critical skills we want students to learn. So it may look different than it's looked, but the excellence is through the roof. And that's where I just find it shocking that people are having that conversation and not using any facts to back it up.
With all due respect, you're not giving a lot of credit to the kids in the family.
It's without a doubt the kids, it's
Because
without.
I know for my kid,
Yeah.
when he went to see the counselor,
Yeah.
the counselor had 500 kids that he was trying to counsel. I had to hire a private counselor to get my kid to the school
Yeah.
that he needed to go to.
Yeah.
So a lot of it's not here, and the counselor said, oh, you should go to Michigan. Cold weather wasn't even on his list. Why did he put them there? We had to hire somebody privately, and it cost a lot of money. And luckily, he went on to UCLA and did great. So it comes to the family and the kid and the support system in addition to the school.
I agree with that statement. I would also say that I think we have extremely dedicated college counselors,
Yeah,
which I know
absolutely.
have really
But they're
prioritized
overwhelmed.
that.
But they're overwhelmed.
I can agree with that.
Can I just jump in for 1 second? I just want to say, happy to talk to you more after this, by the way. So
Great.
let's continue the conversation. are right, our roads are in lousy condition, but we're all in on them. Our school buildings have been in lousy condition, we're all in on them. Our pensions were underfunded forever, we're all in. So we got a lot of work to do, and yeah, there are some people who thought we shouldn't have bought Webster Woods. 24 city councilors agreed with me. So there was a lot preserving our largest forest for, it was 15 million, not 17, but directionally you were correct. So different people have different opinions on what's the right priorities, I get it, and we're a democracy and, you know, we figure it out together. But I do understand that certain people will, like you, say, I would have put that 15 million somewhere else. But I get it. But we're working hard, and I'd say we're getting things done, and with the help of the voters, this override in my mind is essentially about NPS. There are other elements in here which I think are relevant and important for our city and are good. It's from our youngest to our seniors, and I do think we need more dedicated dollars for climate change. I'm proud that the city of Newton is working hard on that and putting dollars towards it. But I do understand not everybody agrees with me. But look forward to talking. I'll give you my card
Sure.
afterwards. Come on in and visit.
And it's not, as I said, it's not about my priority over someone else's, it's saying, there are only so many, there's only so far the money's gonna go. And perhaps things could be delayed for something else.
I'm doing that all the time.
Okay.
You can imagine how many people are disappointed in me that I'm saying no or saying we can't do it this year.
Okay. And then, one last comment, since Chris, you're my, school committee, the board rep. If you could just go through and make sure you look at the survey results for the school system as far as, parental viewpoints, and if there are some significant differences, I'd love to know about it. Like if, Mayor, if you said, hey, we're doing so much better than Needham or whatever else because of what they have to do, it'd be great as a citizen or resident here to understand that, because there could be some misinformation, but when all you have is what the data is in front of you, it can be overwhelming in terms of the amounts.
Let's get
So-
some other, yeah.
Just to respond to that, so it's what I want to bring up, that, you know, somewhere between your question and Henry's answer is that survey that was done by HYA, our superintendent search consultant, and 1,500 people responded to it, and something like 70% said, you know, NPS wasn't heading in the right direction. So that's a serious concern. We have to take that to heart, and I think, you know, what Henry's saying is true, but at the same time, we can't sit here and say there's not an issue that we need to address. So, you know, part of that, I think, is the communication that we have as a district, and part of it is, you know, how we think about, you know, taking our budget and then allocating it into, you know, the resources we have into PD and things like that, and, you know, what are we driving at? And one of the things, and I think this is going to be a sea change in how we'll be able to view this, is, and I give Kathy Smith a ton of credit here, we're gonna have at the end of this year an annual report for NPS. And it's gonna be, here is some quantitative, qualitative data addressing how did we do? How did we address the goals we set forth? And we had a long discussion between the school committee and the administration this year in our goal setting process, which normally is a pretty quick process and ended up being a very lengthy process this year and sort of landed in the middle. But having that is, that's how we're gonna start to prove out some of these things we're talking about. And we're gonna have this thing called a portrait of a graduate, which is gonna be a probably multi-year process to figure out. It's gonna take a lot of community involvement. But it's gonna really set forth, what do we stand for as NPS? What do we want a child graduating from NPS to look like? And, you know, that's going to hopefully, I think, encompass a lot of what we're talking about. This, you know, sort of seemingly inherent conflict between, you know, our concepts of equity and excellence and how we think about diversity and all these things. It can bring together all those things, and we can have, you know, the big adult discussion that I think needs to be had about all that stuff. So I give Kathy a ton of credit. That is coming. This is in the, you know, my oldest is in 5th grade. So in the 6 years I've been involved in MPS, I haven't seen that. I haven't seen, you know, that level of transparency and accountability come forth to address you, the parents, the community. This is how we're doing and this is what we stand for. So I think that would be a big change. I just want to address the second point, and again, this will be my opinion, because this is, I think you bring up important questions of the bigger picture city allocation, because it does play into the structural deficit. And just to your point on pension funding, just as I talked about, you know, the rate of city growth is 3.5%, you know, NPS personnel growing at 4.3%, unsustainable. So the rate of city growth is 3.5%. Our rate of growth to funding our pension is 9.6%. That will, over the course of the time our pension becomes fully funded, consume or crowd out, however you want to think about that, in incremental, what's the number, roughly 4.5% of the city budget. So we've got to think real hard about that,
And
of
can I
how we
just,
continue.
jump on, when you finish on Chris,
Sure.
finish your sentence, but let me just tell you.
How we continue to move forward if we're going to continue with that rate of growth, where something's gonna be 8.8% of our city budget today, and is gonna be 13.2% of our city budget in 7 years, and none of that cash is available for current city services. So, yeah, it's a real obligation, we really have to fund it, we are really paying for the sins of the past, as we are with many things, but if that's the priorities we're gonna put forth, then yeah, we've got to figure out the rest of it.
And I've been very transparent about this every year that I was a city councilor and every year that's been a mayor. We just got our AAA bond rating again. The credit challenge, the Moody's report, highlighted in yellow. The credit challenge is our large unfunded pension and OPEB, retiree healthcare liabilities. This one, it's our generation to fix, and it's expensive, it's painful, and we're doing it. And by the way, we're not gonna be done till 2045. So if we've got it, but once we hit 2030 and we're on the path to do it, the costs drop dramatically. So we've got a hard 6 more years in front of us. We can do it, we will do it, it does make a difference, and it's one of the reasons we're in an override right now. But we've got a plan, it's a good plan, and we can do this.
I have a question then about the override, but about excellence. And I think that it has to do about the data that we have available. Do we have the data available, right? I mean, I'm speaking just from what I'm hearing from friends, what I'm seeing from friends and my kids' peers. And I will say that my daughter here in high school is doing amazing. She loves it. We love it. I don't know about my 2 boys, you know, we'll see. But here's a few questions about the excellence. One of the things that changed was the 4 levels of math that were then, you know, divided into 2. I know I've heard a lot of complaint about it from parents who had kids here before. We didn't know any different because she started with that and it was like that. I've heard from teachers how hard it is for them to teach, especially after COVID, when you have, you know, for example, if you're teaching math honors, you still have kids in, you know, in different levels, and now you have kids in very different levels. That's one question. The other one is, I know that we have, and that's to your point before about how parents are putting in a very big number of children that are going to Russian math or the Kumon or, you know, other, you know, math after school programs. with the math that the public schools, have. I know about, a lot of families that decide to send their kids to private schools, and yeah, then they come back to high school. Do we have any data to show, okay, kids who went to Russian math are doing much better? Kids who went to private school in middle school and then came back to high school are doing much better. Where is the data?
So I can speak to the last question really quickly and say that, that we've had teachers and our math department chair have surveyed students in terms of Russian school and math. We found in terms of our honors math is that there are not more students who took Russian school and math than honors. In fact, at some years it's been more students who did not take Russian school and math. A lot of it, I think, is because Russian school and math may teach you sort of the way to calculate an answer. It doesn't really help you to apply what you're learning, which is what we are doing in our math. It's been the integrated concept philosophy of math in MPS for a long time. We are expanding offerings for students who are looking for more challenges. And so we were just talking about the math modeling club, and so that's really skyrocketed in our school. We had 5 teams go on to this national convention around math modeling. We were one of 2 schools in Massachusetts that had students going. When I went into that junior class, it was a junior, there were actually sophomore class that was accelerated and honor students. And I think it's important to recognize that math has 4 levels. It's accelerated in honors, and it's ACP and CP. And so the accelerated students are calculus tracked students on their way. And so those students who are in the math modeling club we're feeling challenged, we're excited about math, and we're thinking about how to apply it. We have a new seal that we're about to announce for applied STEM. That'll be an opportunity for students to put it on their transcript, which has been a real success that we've heard from colleges in terms of showing where the passion of our students are. I think that multi-level has become a red herring in a lot of ways in our school about things that people are critical of. I think that the data is still early, but what we are seeing on a macro scale is that it's helping our students to grow. It's not hurting our students who are at the top. In fact, we're continuing to provide more offerings for students so that they feel challenged and that we're differentiating for them. It without a doubt is more challenging. When I speak to teachers, they feel like it is really hard. They understand the philosophy behind it. And I say this every time that I talk about multi-level. This was not a school-based decision. It was departments that made those decisions. So in fact, department chairs went back to departments last year and said, do we want to continue with this? And they were committed to going with it despite how hard it is, because we're seeing the roots of really exceptional teaching. I got hired being very, very clear. We are going to talk about instruction in the school. That's my passion. It was a need of the school seven years ago. And so we have done a lot of work to shift instruction to one where it's less about lecture and teacher-centered, and one where there's more engagement for students, and there's more pathways for students to reach those high expectations. And that's not because of multi-level, that's because that's the way to reach more students. And we want it to be more engaging for students.
You can just jump in a little bit.
February 7th, to learn more about
Yeah.
that.
I'll just jump in. I mentioned at the beginning, I work with the high schools and the middle schools, so zooming out a little bit, I think a lot of the questions that families have about math instruction and how students are grouped really go back to changes in best practice in mathematics nationally and internationally, and understanding that the way that math was organized, students were grouped, and that it was taught when we all went through school are no longer proven to be the best ways to help all students achieve and advance in math. And so that's work that we've been doing for over a decade in the public schools with math education. One, ensuring, as Henry said at the beginning, that we're not just teaching the procedures and like the steps and you flip and you reverse and that doesn't actually teach you to excel in math. It can teach you can move forward rapidly through content that way, but you don't develop the deep understanding to be outstanding mathematicians or apply that in your life and in the field. So the work of deepening the work we do in math, it requires a lot of things. It requires new curriculum. So there's a lot of planning that's been done at the middle school level that's moving up through the high school level now. It gives teachers are still struggling here, and kids who are ready to go here, and kids who can take it to the next level within those classes. So going back 7 or 8 years ago, we had Bigelow was actually our pioneer with our 7th and 8th grade math classes, not having 2 levels in middle school at that point. And they did that for several years while the other 3 middle schools still had leveled math classes. And we were able actually to do it as an experiment. It wasn't intended this way, but we then looked at Newton North. We had students coming from Day who had been in honors 8th grade math and regular 8th grade math, and students coming from Bigelow, where the teachers had done a lot of work, applying new curriculum, a lot of support and professional development. We had the same percentages of students making it to honors math and AB and BC calculus, whether they went through the middle school program at Bigelow or at Day. And so that was part of that understanding of applying what are in fact the best practices from Math National Council, Teachers of Mathematics, and putting it in practice here. And again, even in our peer districts, there's not a peer district out there that has 4 levels of high school math. They've got 2 or 3 levels of math at any other of the schools that we like to compare ourselves with. So again, you mentioned a red herring, but I think it's actually an area where we're excelling and we're applying the best practices. We're tracking to make sure that we're not negatively impacting our advanced students. They get to be in a lot less segregated classes. They get to be with their peers and experience a full range of students, but also be challenged and pushed to some of the amazing things Henry mentioned. And then all of our students are achieving at higher levels because of that too.
So just give one other example is that in our English, in our honors English, it was typical for you to see both you mentioned your boys. So this is why I'm bringing this up. It was typical in honors English that you would see 99% to 100% girls in English class, in honors English. And now, because of multi-level, we have seen more of a mix, which is great because we want our boys to see how to read deeply, how to discuss literature, how to engage in those conversations. That's how it raises the expectations for them. It doesn't lower the expectations of all of those girls in the honors classes. It raises the expectations for the boys and helps them to engage and see that they can do it, and so they skyrocket. And so those are the kind of disparities that we're addressing because of it, right? And I think that those are critical things to think about. And I appreciate the perception issue because I agree that that's a communication issue, but I also think we need to include the data. And some of the data I shared, I think is important for us to remember that we are seeing more students flourishing in the school right now.
So ask about the Bigelow experience, when you dropped to multi-level, did you check how many of those Bigelow students had extra math outside of school? Was that a component of looking how many of them went to honors?
Yeah, I think that was around the
Yes,
same
we
time
have-
we were looking at some of that data on English and math in the honors classes. I don't know that we saw any pattern on that. I don't know that anecdotally there was a sense that everybody at Russian math was from Bigelow.
No, I'm just
and
asking
students
if
weren't.
that was part of the tracking data, like is your math only from school, did you receive any extra?
Yeah,
Because it's
we've always
so
had that
common,
range.
like of the kids I know, there is so many kids.
We've always had that
Wow.
range of students excelling in our honors class, some who may have been in Russian math and many others, the vast majority who haven't been in Russian math. So I think that's been true whether we were offering 2 levels or 1 level of math at the middle schools. And I didn't mention now, all of our 4 middle schools have that same model and are preparing students for all levels of math with the curriculum and instructional strategies that we have.
I think this brings up a really good point. I just want to tie this in with what Chris said, and certainly have given me much too much credit before this has happened, Chris. So you're making me nervous. But when you talk about this annual report, and you have a new superintendent coming on board, and I guarantee you it's something to build on. So if you have, and again, you're a large district, we can talk about the Wellesleys, the Needhams, they do great work. I love to see what they're doing also. But you have almost 12,000 students in your district. You're a large metropolitan district. You take in kids, different socioeconomic levels, you have your NETCO program. It brings so much to your district. So in saying that, when you create this document, your annual report, I think over time, you're gonna be able to, again, look at the data that we're collecting, making sure that we have that personalized learning for kids and the challenges. So it isn't just a good, it isn't just, well, these are all the great stories about the Newton Public Schools. You wanna have those in there, but you also wanna share with people transparently exactly this kind of a discussion. And I'll leave you with this. I've also talked about being at a conference And it was about equity and excellence, and I was on the Cape with school committee members, superintendents, and I loved listening to Dr. Diane Kelly, who is president of the Mass Association for School Superintendents, and also a school superintendent in Revere. And she talked about during COVID, they did the so-called de-leveling, which is recommended, by DESE also. And they, just because of the cohorts and what they had to do to teach students virtually during that time. And she said when they came back, people wanted to go back to, advanced honors, et cetera, the leveling. And it was her opportunity to work with her teams and say, we're going to continue because we're seeing, and this was data, and I'm using her numbers, 86% of your white Caucasian students were in honors, AP, higher level, and those students remained. That same percentage, they didn't lose anything by the de-leveling, but the other subgroups, watching how they came up, the opportunities for them, the access to these classes, but that's data. That is saying to the community, this perception is not correct, or maybe it is. I mean, we would have to address that. So data is important, that will be, and we're gonna start this annual report. I think you'll build that over time as you start to move forward.
You guys have been so generous with your time. It's already almost 9:45. So I don't know if there's any one last question or.
Well, I had one last question, because I feel like this is really important, and Kathy, thank you so much. I feel like as an interim superintendent, you have gone above and beyond. Is when you said, we have to put the students first. We have one choice on March 14th, it's to add funding to our schools, a $4.5 million of recurring money, and I just can't say how important that is to our district, but for those parents who maybe weren't there for the, this is one budget, and if we get the override, and this is one budget if we don't, I was wondering if you could just I hear Chris saying, we just have to live within this 3.5%, but the reality of what that means for our district, if we don't get this extra money, I think is just so stark, and as one of the school committee members said, sobering. And maybe if you could just reiterate for parents who aren't aware of what a budget would house the additional infusion of funding might look like, I think that would be really important, because this is essentially the question that us as parents, that's what we have control over. We don't have control over a lot of this other.
Here's what I'll say about that, and I will tell you a couple of things. As I said, our team has been working since last week. We're working with principals, so we're working with department heads. We sat yesterday, we are right now, because we're not sure what's going to happen, and we're actually presenting our budget to the school committee, I think on March 21st or 22nd. So we have to stop the so-called process. And this is, I don't even know if I'd use the word sobering. I mean, you're going to watch us on February 6th, and this isn't theater, by the way. This is looking at every level of, and you heard Dr. Turner, say athletics, not a scare tactic. We are looking at percentages. When you have a $6 to $8 million deficit, if in fact the override doesn't pass, that is looking at, I want to say everything you can to stay away from the classroom, but truth be told, when you look at that 89% personnel, you could be looking at efficiencies. That's where you start. You take a look at some things that we possibly could do without. Maybe it's curriculum, maybe it's some extra technology programs, but you then start to cut deep. You look at the and I'm using this as an example, the technology department. I work with Steve Retendi, my director, who needs more and more because of what is expected for 21st century learning, and we're saying maybe 11th and 12th graders, maybe it's bring your own device. MCAS is over, maybe that's something that we do to pull back. Maybe it isn't one-to-one devices. If we're unable to keep this department staffed, which we actually should be increasing that, our reliance on some of the ESSER funding, some of the funding that we have used, one-time funding over the next couple of years, which are going away. We should have been taking that into our operating budget. And at this point here, if the override doesn't pass, it will have a significant impact. I will tell you, the most significant impact is in your staffing in your classrooms. When I tell you I walk around and I count heads, when I counted 18 heads in Lincoln Elliott in kindergarten, those class sizes absolutely will go up. You know, what they go up to, again, is going to depend on closing that gap, but it will have an increase, not just when I talk about the kindergarten classes or the elementary, it'll have an impact on your cohorts at the middle school level, and it will clearly have an impact on your high school course offerings. You know, again, the teacher-student ratio, it'll have an impact on athletics. You would have to look at, there's some, and I wanna tell the story that I think I told at school committee. There was at one point, I'm using this as an example, if you have a JV varsity freshman basketball, and I did not realize that you actually have a no-cut policy with your freshman sports, and I love that. I love that kids have an opportunity to be part of a team, to see what their skills are, and not to have to be that expert player. So it gives them an opportunity to select. If you were to reduce your freshman sports, I'm using it as an example, and kids have opportunity at JV and varsity, you know, that takes away a level of opportunity for the very kids that need it. And you can put that across the board at every extracurricular, whether it is your theater programs. I see I'm frustrated.
Well, I guess, you know, you're putting, oh, we're gonna cut the kids, okay? Why are we doing a special election? Why don't you just do this in the regular election? Why are we spending, what, probably $1 million for a special election? Why are we doing this in March? You could have done it in November, this coming year, or this past year. So there's $1 million that we're gonna spend to do this election that don't, oh, we're gonna have to cut the kids. You could have done this in November or the following November.
I'm sorry when you say cutting the students, you know, when we have a very large budget, and when we have that kind of a gap, we try to stay away from, but it ends up being across the board. It hits the custodial services, it hits our central team.
But you could have saved $1 million by doing this in November. Why are we doing this in March?
To be clear, that's not Kathy's decision.
That's not who's saying that is, but there's probably $1 million for this election that is being put into March.
I think it's more $250,000, but that's neither here nor there.
Okay, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, but look, here's, I'm sorry, Joel, can I?
No, that's
So, and just to address like what I said about the 3.5% growth, that's to be sustainable over the long run. We can't grow faster than the city. Otherwise, we need a system of more frequent operating overrides on a, you know, every other year basis or something like that. And until we have that, we've got to, you know, we don't determine how much the city allocates to us. Only the mayor determines that. So we have to live within what the mayor is going to allocate to us. Like, we can't call ourselves a sustainable enterprise unless we do that. But to the bigger picture question that Kathy was just addressing here, and, you know, bringing together some of the previous points, look, I have an issue with, you know, saying that we need to fund our pension 10 years early, and that's going to eat up an incremental 4.5% of our city budget, and that's going to cause real problems. I have an issue with that. But the question that's being asked of me right now is not, do I want to change the way we fund our pension? I don't have the ability to do that. If that was the question being asked of me, I would say, yes, let's find a way to cut that rate of growth to match the growth of the city budget. The question being asked of me is, do I want $4.5 million more for the schools and $4.5 million, roughly speaking, $4.5 million more for the city? Recognizing that money is fungible, and that the $500,000, the plant trees, and, you know, it's all going into one big pot, and, you know, I think about my kids, you know, do I want $4.5 million less for them? My third grader is a very expensive kid to teach, as some people know him, they're chuckling.
I love it.
You know, he's yours. You know, that's the hand I'm being dealt is money for the schools or money not for the schools. It's not, can I change the date of the city election? That's not the question being asked. So I have issues with other parts of how the city allocates its resources. You know, there's things we need to address within NPS that are within our control that we're talking about here. But there's a very binary question being asked of us in this override, and it's yes money or no money. And if it's no money, you know, from my perspective, we're effectively kind of calling the mayor's bluff of, hey, she's going to come up with the money from somewhere else. Will she? I don't know. I don't, you know, do I wanna take that bet? And just the final point, you know, when Kathy gave her presentation, she talked about, you know, how are we in here? Well, we have the structural deficit, you know, we're in a period of pretty tough inflation right now, and that's increasing things. We have the out-of-district tuition, some one-off things like that. But she had a category of student needs, and we've talked about it here today. There's no question student needs have increased dramatically. From mental health, from social, emotional, you know, I remember last year we were going through the cuts, and I was sitting down with a fifth grade teacher, and she had 5 middle schools around her desk, and she's like, I'm the bartender at the most popular bar in town, and they are stacked up too deep, and I can't serve the drinks fast enough. That's not how her fifth grade classroom used to operate 3 years ago. That's a real need. There's real human resources we have to put at that need. And let's not forget how we got there. We got there because we locked schools down for a year. So whether you think that was the right thing to do or absolutely necessary, or whether you think, as I do, we were placing too much of the burden of the pandemic on the back of our kids, doesn't matter. We're here where we are. So that's how I'm thinking about this, as, you know, someone who has problems with some of the same concerns that some of you folks have brought up. Sorry, that was a lot.
And to your point, like, it's going back to kids, it is, you know, it's hard to, on the micro level, it's hard to say that it's not. So, you know, one of the biggest criticisms that I hear in the fall are from junior parents whose kids didn't get into AP statistics. We've gone from 100 kids in AP stats when I started, we have 200 seats in AP stats. We are not going to be able to offer juniors AP statistics, something like, you know, some of our larger classes. So like, it is going to have an impact. I think since I've been here, we have done more cutting than we've done adding. And there have been smaller cuts, right? What I'm concerned about this one is that it's, we are not at a place where, you know, someone's gonna retire and we're gonna be able to absorb that course. When we were chatting last year was design, which is a very small program, but an amazingly impactful program in our school, you know, was cut. And so we're now starting to get to the place where there are programs that you know, serve kids, are at risk, and that's what I'm worried about. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I think all our hearts are saying, like, let's help the kids. You know, then your head says, okay, someone said 70% of people think we're in the wrong direction. How are we going in the right path? And I guess my point was, you know, it probably should have been solved on the city side, not put on the backs of the schools. You know, because like the election was $250,000, $500,000, whatever it is, that's a lot of money. You know, we could have saved and used it for the school. So.
And I will leave you with this too. When I look at, again, maybe some very small districts, and you look at it proportionally, and I heard superintendents here talking, you know, and a number of them are getting close to 6% increase in their budget. Because they're experiencing, when I started with the OST rate of 14%, or the student needs, or our, you know, heating of buildings, you know the costs that are going up. So it is not unusual. So when we talk about 3.5%, and we have a very large budget, you know, I want to be appreciative of that, but that's not reality to be able to sustain, and hence your structural deficit. So it is not unusual right now to be getting, and we looked at, probably my assistant superintendent for business belongs to a group, and you can kind of look at what's happening in other districts. I think we were looking at 40 districts, some very tiny districts, and it might have been, I think the lowest was a 2.7% increase, and many even beyond that 6%. But the majority were at 6%. So it's, with our override, is it 5.2? Is that what it is with the override? So that is the ballpark, and it's not that we don't have things that we need to fix or take a look at over time. And the last thing I'll tell you is, and I hope I'm joined by my school committee members, you know, when this is over, and I am trying to be optimistic, and again, I'm asking you to go out and have these difficult conversations. But we're not done. We're not done with advocating at a state level, and I am looking forward to that March 3rd date. Today I told you I'm leaving to join superintendents to plan that agenda and make sure we're, you know, forcefully talking about the impact on all our budgets. And also the city. I'm not familiar with your city. I am familiar with city government. I'm familiar with, obviously, you know, school budgeting. This is a little bit different, but we're not done. So, you know, please bear with us, but the first thing we have is this override, and that's why we're sharing this information.
So I want to thank all of you for joining us. We really appreciate all of you for being here. questions that you were asking will be explained in more detail and an opportunity for discussion. It's also interesting hearing about the profile of the graduate, something that our school council is starting to work on here. So it's great to see that there's some synergy